Capitol Police is ready for the intelligence and security issues that arise in the future. As we begin, I want to note we're holding this hearing in compliance with the regulations for remote committee proceedings pursuant to House Resolution 8. Generally, we ask committee members and witnesses to keep their microphones muted when not speaking and to limit background noise. Members will need to unmute themselves when seeking recognition or when recognized for their 5 minutes. Witnesses will also need to unmute themselves when recognized to answer a question. Members and the witness, please keep your camera on at all times. Even if you need to step away for a moment, please don't leave the meeting or turn your camera off. And I'd like to remind members that the regulations governing remote proceedings require that we cannot participate in more than one committee proceeding at the same time. This time I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and have any written statements be made part of the record, and hearing no objections, that is so ordered. Now, when we recessed last week, we were about to recognize Mr. Stile for his 5 minutes of questions. And so, Mr. Stile, if you are ready, I will recognize you now.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Mr. Bolton, for being back here once again. I want to pick up right where we left off and dig into some of the concerns that I have about the issues not being addressed at the U.S. Capitol Police's intelligence operations. And so to pick up, was there, in your opinion, one single point or multiple points of failure with respect to the receipt and analysis of intelligence concerning January 6th?
Thank you, sir. I would say that there were multiple points of deficiencies and failures within the intelligence division.
Okay, so I only get really tight on time. Multiple points. Sure. And so last week, you mentioned several IG recommendations made in 2019, like increasing staffing for the Intelligence and Interagency Coordination Division, were not properly implemented in 2019. In fact, there were multiple previous recommendations your office discovered needed to be re-implemented after January 6th. Is that correct?
Correct, sir.
So let's look back at a handful of recent incidents involving the Capitol Police, if we can. In June 2017, in fact, 2 of my Republican colleagues on this committee were targeted in the congressional baseball practice shooting. Did you receive an after-action report at that
time? Yes, sir. I did receive an after-action not that long ago.
And how long did it take to receive that after-action report?
I'd say it was over a year or more.
Okay. In January 2018, an Amtrak train carrying several members of Congress crashed into a garbage truck, as you may be aware, derailed, involving the death of one of the passengers. Did you receive an after-action report following the train wreck?
No, sir, I have not.
Okay. And in November of 2019, a plane entered the no-fly zone over DC. Did you receive a U.S. Capitol Police after-action report following this incident?
No, sir, I did not.
Okay, we're all familiar with the incidents on January 6th. Have you received a U.S. Capitol Police after-action report following the January 6th incident?
No, sir, I have not.
Do you know when we can anticipate that you'll receive this report?
No, sir, I have no idea the time frame for the department's report.
Okay. Let me speak. I mean, on risk of speaking on behalf of all my colleagues, I can say that I, for one, eagerly await the opportunity to review that report. I have some real concerns here for what I'm hearing about the lack of after-action reports. Other police departments around the country routinely use these to fix problems and implement proactive changes. And there seems to be a problem with the U.S. Capitol Police implementing changes first, and then also learning from our mistakes, where I think after-action reports could be uniquely beneficial. There seems to be that this problem, in my opinion, starts from the top, and we're not going to be able to resolve it until we make necessary reforms to the organization in charge, which is the Capitol Police Board. After-action reports are just going to be absolutely critical in this, and I think it's something that this committee is going to broadly need to look into. With that, I'll yield back.
Style, have you concluded?
Yes, I yield back.
Very good. Mr. Aguilar would be next, but I don't think Mr. Aguilar is here. So we will turn to Ms. Scanlon for her 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. We were just talking about the, sorry, pulling up the right document here. We were talking about the need for security clearances. I'm sorry, backstepping. We talked about the need to professionalize the intelligence analysts within the department and to build out the intelligence interagency and coordination division significantly. Does the department have the secure workstations and modern analytic tools it needs if we are able to upgrade the training, et cetera, for the workforce?
Yes, ma'am. They actually need to enhance that and gain more of those type of workstations with the idea that you will be adding additional full-time employees, FTEs, that you will need to have additional equipment to coincide with the ramp up of additional personnel.
Okay. And do we need to train all department officers and employees on the intelligence cycle? I mean, one of the issues we seem to face on January 6th was that the intel wasn't getting from one place to another adequately.
Yes, ma'am. That would be something not every single officer would need to be specifically trained, but certainly within your basic training and even having follow-up training on how to understand the intelligence that's being presented to you. At least having a basic knowledge. Obviously, those who are in the intelligence division, bureau, whatever it becomes, would have more specified training, but at least your basic entry-level officers and civilians would have a basic understanding of the intelligence so they could even know what questions to ask.
Sure. So when we were talking about security clearances, and you noted that in order to disseminate enough information and make sure it got to the right places, the department should require its sworn and operational civilian employees to obtain top secret clearance and require administrative civilian employees to get at a minimum a secret clearance. Have steps been taken to get that moving? I know that was a long-standing recommendation.
No, ma'am, have not heard that they are moving towards that. There is one thing I also want to point out about having individuals with top secret clearance that would provide you a layer for insider threat, because these individuals would require every 5 years of an update within to continue to have their security clearances. If they can't maintain the security clearance, then they could no longer be employees of the Capitol Police. So it would add a layer for that insider threat potential.
And that insider threat has become an increasing concern. Am I right? We've seen reporting that these extremist organizations are actively trying to recruit ex-military and police officers. Is that part of what we're trying to address?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. I would yield back.
Lady from New Mexico is now recognized for 5 minutes. I am seeing a circle. I think she is having connection issues. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, you cannot be seen. So hopefully your connection issues will be resolved. I think there's an interest among members. Ms. Fernandez, yes, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Except that I think we're going to have to go and come back to you. Hopefully you'll be able to get to a place where you have more reliable connection. I think members have an interest in an additional round of questions, if I'm hearing correctly. So I will go now to Mr. Davis, the ranking member, for any questions that he may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just so you know, your staff director, Jamie Fleet, was trying to start the hearing without you. I at least wanted to that. But we successfully calmed this down and waited for you, but give Jamie my best. Hey, Mr. Bolton, before I start my questions today, I wanted to quickly highlight a major takeaway from last Thursday. And that is, in many ways, the chief has the ability to execute, but not the authority to do so. While the board has all the authority to act, but no ability to execute. Even worse, politics frequently gets in the way, paralyzing the board and preventing it from responding in a timely manner to the security needs of the Capitol. Now, Mr. Bolton, it's great to see you again. Thanks for coming back. Are you aware of a U.S. Capitol Police directive initiated by then Sergeant at Arms Paul Irving to the architect of the Capitol, sent on January 5th, to move approximately 500 bike racks serving as security barricades away from First Street Northeast and Constitution Avenue to the east front?
No, sir, I'm not aware of that. That may be part of our future projects, but for the first two flash reports, we have not delved into that. But we anticipate, while we look into like especially manpower utilization, we will probably come across that very issue.
Well, this week we've uncovered emails from the architect of the Capitol where it's clear that this was directed by the House Sergeant at Arms against legitimate security concerns from the AOC, where the AOC, Brett Blanton, called it illogical. This is yet another example of the dysfunction of the security decision-making process of the Capitol Police Board. Can you describe, Mr. Bolton, the board's statutory authority as it relates to the policing of the Capitol buildings and grounds?
Sir, since they're not really in my purview, I wouldn't be able to answer that question appropriately.
I appreciate that. I know the situation you're in. Just to remind everybody at the hearing and who's watching, the IG is actually hired by the Capitol Police Board. I understand it's not your purview, but we need to make it our purview on the committee. Can you describe the board's emergency powers, though?
Again, that would probably be a question of more appropriate for the board members to opine on.
Yes, Mr. Bolton, I appreciate that. In an emergent, and we will ask them, hopefully we'll have a hearing to ask them. We haven't had that opportunity yet, which is why I'm asking you. In an emergency situation, does the chief of police have to wait for approval from anyone else before responding to an external threat?
My understanding, that would be correct, sir, that the chief would need permission for an emergency to be declared.
Okay, so the chief's limited in what they can do without approval, right?
That would be correct, sir, yes.
So is that why then Sergeant at Arms Irving asked Speaker Pelosi for permission before he sought support from the National Guard on January 6th, as reported in the New York Times?
That, sir, I would not have any direct knowledge about that.
We'll go with what the Times says then. Does the board have the authority to issue regulations?
They have a broad, like for traffic regulations, yes, they have that authority.
Traffic regulations, yes. What about issue regulations as we normally talk about in the United States Code?
Again, sir, that would probably be more of a question to direct it to the board as opposed to myself.
Well, I direct you to the code, which very clearly requires the Speaker of the House to sign off on any board regulations. So with that, I do want to say thank you again, Mr. Bolton. Is there anything that I would have mentioned to you in the time that I have left, or that I wouldn't have mentioned, or any issues you want to put forth in regards to the board or any of my line of questioning that I brought forth earlier that this committee would you think need to know?
Thank you, sir, but not at this time.
Well, then I guess I'm going to have to yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask the Inspector General about your recommendation to us to explore incentivizing the Civil Disturbance Unit, the CDU program. And you say that you found that there were multiple deficiencies in the program, in the planning for civil disturbances. Are there ways to incentivize joining CDU that could complement what you mentioned last time in terms of financial incentives?
Yeah, so like many other federal agencies, they do provide, even the department provides what they call would be technician pay, hazardous duty pay, those type of additional funds that would be incorporated into their normal pay. So that would be one method that you would be able to incentivize the CDU. In addition, it would certainly be worth a discussion on a different vein, allowing the department the ability to provide on-the-spot awards, monetary awards like other federal agencies do, where for exceptional service or basically, yeah, exceptional service.
Do they have the power to do that now? Are they making financial rewards to the people who demonstrated valiant and heroic service on January the 6th?
My understanding is no, they don't have that authority. I could be wrong, but my understanding is they don't have that authority to provide. Now certainly, they can do other things, whether it be certificates or award ceremonies. But as far as like an on-the-spot award for exceptional service or the duty, they don't have that authority to be something that they could look into providing their officers in case-by-case basis.
Okay, Mr. Bolton, the Capitol officers have had a hell of a period over the last 4 months. They're exhausted, they're stressed out, they continue to be overworked because they have to continue to service Congress. I'm wondering whether you feel confident that the department can continue to protect the Capitol while also working to implement your new recommendations, including around the civil disturbance unit.
I do have confidence, especially in the officers. I've been here since 2006. Throughout many other instances, things that have happened, but each and every day, the officers come and they're standing the post and providing safety for us and doing their duty, regardless of whatever happened. Even that awful day on February or April 2nd, they came back and they stood post and provided us with safety and security. They are very resilient. They are very dedicated, and I do have confidence that they will be able to move forward.
So do you think your recommendations can be implemented without diverting resources from the day-to-day mission of the department?
I do believe there are a majority of those recommendations. One of them are just involved, or not one of them, several of them involve just policies and procedures, setting up internal controls. That's not taking away day-to-day duties from the officers. And even intelligence, you'd be looking more to hire civilians outside the department or even at the training services bureau, be looking for outside, so you're not taking away the day-to-day duties of the officers.
Okay, will you explain to me how in the past your reports have been received by the department and whether you work with them on implementation of recommendations, or do you just sort of publish it and then whatever happens, happens?
We do. We work with the department to the extent that we can. Keep in mind when we formulate our recommendations, they are based on best practices throughout the government. We rely on the GAO, Government Accounting Office, as well as other agencies, their best practices in our recommendations. We can't get down to the specifics and tell them exactly how to do it. If we do that, then I'm no longer independent, because now I'll be going back and auditing my own work. So then I'm no really longer independent. So I have to be very careful in my communications with the department. I can't give them exactly how to do it. That's why our recommendations sometimes are broad. It's policy, programs, internal control based.
Okay, and my final question is, do you think that there are any of the deficiencies that you've discovered in this report that you ought to have discovered before January 6th?
That's difficult to answer in a sense because some of these deficiencies have reoccurred. We have brought forth some of these other issues in previous reports. Leadership training, intelligence, and other reports. So we have highlighted, and even training, even though it wasn't directly to CDU, because again, like I said, it's an ad hoc unit. But on other areas, we've noted, hence why for FY21, in my annual plan, I had planned on doing Training Services Bureau as a whole, a complete review of them, as well as some other elements that we're basically touching now as well.
Thank you very much. I yield back to Madam Chair.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Loudermilk, is recognized.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bolton, thank you for appearing with us again. The last time that we spoke, I asked a few questions about the police board. And so I kind of want to follow up on some of those questions that we had before. The first is, can you describe in general the police board's administrative responsibilities?
I'm sorry, sir. Since they're not really my purview, that's something I would not have looked into or looked at. So it wouldn't be appropriate for me to opine on something like that.
I wasn't asking for opinion, just, what are the general police board's administrative responsibilities? Somebody, I imagine somewhere knows that. Not asking for opinion, just as if you have knowledge of it.
To answer, sir, no, I do not have knowledge of it.
Okay. Well, do you know how much power and authority the board has over the actual Capitol Police personnel?
Again, sir, that's not really in my purview. I wouldn't be looking at any of their functions or how they go about doing their business. My mandate is the Capitol Police.
Okay, I understand that. Somebody's got to know these answers. I'm just looking for, do we know anything about them? And one of the things that I asked last time was about the Capitol Police Board and who has oversight over that board. Now that there's been a week past, I'm just wondering if you do know what entity has oversight.
Actually, sir, I went back and I tried to research that myself just for my own edification. I don't believe there is actual oversight of the board, because it's a separate entity that's made up of House, Senate, and the architect of the Capitol.
That's interesting. Okay. Well, I would guess that if there is any oversight, it would be this committee, which if that is the case, and I think it would be, I would hope that we would be having hearings to actually have some oversight to get some of these questions answered that no one seems to be able to answer. So I appreciate your candor on that. It's also my understanding the Capitol Police Board is actively searching for the next chief of police. This isn't a question about the board per se, but if we were to approve a transition toward a proactive protective force, what are the traits the board should look for in a new chief?
It probably wouldn't be appropriate for me to weigh in on something like that. Being independent, it makes whoever the board decides to choose or however they're chosen, it's really not up for me to decide that. I will work with whoever they place in that position, and I will have oversight of that individual.
Okay, I'm not looking for a person, just what are the kind of the traits? What are the skill sets? We've been talking about thinking outside the box and bringing in new ideas. And, look at it as, is it someone that has an extensive amount of law enforcement in a traditional law enforcement agency? Is it someone we should be looking at from a municipal or a large city? Or is it someone we should be looking at through another agency, such as the FBI or Secret Service? I mean, you're just kind of getting an idea from the committee that has at least some level of oversight, what are the traits that really we should be looking for a chief?
Well, probably all the traits you just stated, I think would be a good starting point. I think you pretty much got a good broad brush of the skill sets that they should be looking at.
So do you have, or will you have, or have you provided specific recommendations to the department or the board concerning a move to a more proactive protection force?
Not specific recommendations. Those are more in line with reporting and just that, certain things that they need that would get them to that area, elevating the intelligence division to a bureau level, the training that will get them to that point.
So back to kind of some of the improvements we need to be making to the Capitol Police, how is the communication with other departments and government entities, let's say like the FBI or Secret Service? How has the communication between those been within the Capitol Police, and do they need to be improved?
That would probably be, I'd be able to answer that fully in some of our follow-up work that we will be covering that. Some of that's going to be like the executive team, how there is interaction that with the executive team, command and control areas. So I would be able to answer that question fully once we've completed those flash reports at a later date.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of recommendations you have. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing us a second round of questions. I was so disappointed that we ran out of time at our last hearing, but we're back to it again, and thank you very much. This is a very important topic. Mr. Bolton, thank you for your work. Thank you for your patience with our committee. Mr. Bolton, one of the findings of General Honoree's review of Capitol security is that the department is drastically understaffed. Right now, it appears that the department is 233 officers short of the number authorized by law, and officers logged nearly 720,000 overtime hours in 2020. Can you explain the nexus between staffing levels and the ability to train? Something very basic between staffing and the ability to train.
Thank you, sir. First and foremost, yeah, they need to get up to their authorizing strength. There's no doubt about it. I don't think there's any question by anybody that that needs to be done. That is a difficult thing because always you have to keep in mind of your mission requirements that can change day to day. We have suggested, and never made it a formal recommendation. We were on a previous report years ago that we did for one of their units to bake in what we call bake in, but incorporate what we call fourth shift. You have your three main shifts: day work, afternoons, and midnights. Your fourth shift is your training shift. So what you're doing is you're aligning your scheduling and adding another shift, and that will be your fourth shift, which would be your training, and that's when your officers would be able to go out to Cheltenham or wherever and to be able to receive that training, and it's a week.
Do your officers have time to train?
Well, that's the question. Yeah, we need to be able to provide them with the training. It's a question of, again, rethinking the way we do business, ramping up our training services bureau to a full-fledged training bureau or office of training, and incorporate it and be committed to the training. It's about the will to do it.
All right, well, let's talk a minute about recruitment. Have you looked into what the department can do to recruit more qualified officers?
Not specifically in that vein. We did do a quick review of the recruitment practices. We're just looking at how they're making sure they had the policies and procedures, and were they conforming to those policies and procedures. But we haven't really delved into something as deep as their actual recruitment practices.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Bolton. What percentage of the force would you say would be comprised of frontline officers?
That's right. I wouldn't be able to answer that for you at this time. I'd have to go back and look at some records. I have some reports I could probably reference that back to, and certainly if any follow-up questions, I can be able to answer that for you.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting around to is what impact does being short-staffed have on the frontline officers in the department?
Certainly being short-staffed is going to increase the pressure on the day-to-day operations for the officers. Obviously, if they're having to work forced overtime, not only for themselves, but for their families, it's going to be a significant impact.
I guess my final question is, and you may not be able to answer this, but at least I will try. Have you been able to, in the last few weeks, measure the morale in the department? I'm really, really concerned about it.
No, sir. Well, we haven't been able to really measure. I can just give you my personal observations in a sense, and the officers that I see, they're here, they're resilient, and they are doing their duty, and I'm sure they're hurting. But what I can see, just personal observation, they're doing well considering all that they've gone through.
That's my assessment as well. Thank you, Mr. Bolton.
Very well.
Madam Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Stile is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Bolton, moments ago, you said, for your own edification, you did some research and you walked away with a conclusion that you don't really believe there's any actual oversight of the Capitol Police Board. Holy smokes. It's my opinion that this committee has the responsibility to oversee the Capitol Police Board, including those members that are appointed by Speaker Pelosi. And what I continue to hear throughout today's hearing is that there's a real need for oversight over the Capitol Police Board, that there's some breakdowns in the communication there. You don't need to opine on that because I know you're employed by the Capitol Police Board in that regard, but I think it is incumbent upon this committee to provide that oversight. And if I can, Madam Chairwoman, if I can just ask you if you can confirm if we're going to actually be able to schedule a hearing on the oversight of the Capitol Police Board itself in the near term.
We are certainly looking at the entire position and to make sure that every element of security is reviewed.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair, and hope that we're able to have that in the not too distant future. I appreciate your looking into that for us. I'm broadly concerned about the U.S. Capitol Police level of coordination with its governing body, specifically the architect of the Capitol in particular, who is a critical member of the Capitol Police Board. If I can, in testimony before the Appropriations Committee, the architect of the Capitol, Mr. Blanton, testified that the police leadership had no conversations with the AOC employees regarding requests for National Guard support. That caught my attention. And for the record, does the U.S. Capitol Police coordinate regularly with the Sergeant at Arms and the architect of the Capitol?
Sir, I wouldn't be able to answer that because that would be an internal or a matter with the chief of police and the board in their discussions.
Understood. On a personal level, maybe I'll opine. I look forward to this future hearing that we may be able to have, but it really seems like a critical piece of the puzzle here for us to be moving forward. Generally, could you comment, do you know if there's intelligence sharing between the U.S. Capitol Police and the Sergeant of Arms?
Well, my understanding is in that part of the thing with January 6th that, yeah, they were sharing the intelligence, although it was conflicting intelligence that was provided to the board. But as far as specifics, I wouldn't be able to answer your question on that.
Thank you. And then so a corollary follow-up regarding the architect of the Capitol. Is there regular intelligence sharing between the AOC's office and the U.S. Capitol Police?
That I would not be aware of that, sir.
Okay. And has your office examined how well the U.S. Capitol Police coordinates with the architect of the Capitol in the Sergeant at Arms, or is that again beyond your review?
That would be beyond my review, sir.
So what? I really appreciate you coming in and having this hearing. But what I am walking away with is kind of a classic problem here of everyone and no one being in charge at the same time. To me, it's absolutely clear that what we can't do is we need to do is to, I'm going to start that one over. It's absolutely clear that we can't do what we need to do to protect the Capitol and ensure that our officers can do their jobs without reforming the police board. I really appreciate you having this hearing, Madam Chairwoman. Several of us continue to have questions regarding the Capitol Police Board that can continue to come up. I think it's incumbent upon us to have a future hearing on this. I think it's important for the American people because I think what I'm walking away with is there's some real challenges at the level of the Capitol Police Board. I appreciate the hearing. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady, Mr. Aguilar, is still not able to be here, so the gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Going back to staffing, so I understand that the Capitol Police is short-staffed at this point, and they were before January 6th. I've seen some online chatter indicating that the situation isn't any better, that folks may be looking for jobs elsewhere in the wake of January 6th. Do you know if anything is being done to address retention problems with the Capitol Police?
Ma'am, I'm not privy to that. If there's any internal discussions within the Capitol Police on anything that they're moving towards to help retain those any officers.
Okay. I think during the last Congress, the committee recommended that your office review leadership training issues. And in March of 2020, you issued a report on the subject. Later in 2020, the department released an updated strategic plan. And the #1 goal in the strategic plan was to invest in the Capitol Police workforce. And that included a number of objectives involving training and developing personnel and enhancing management practices to support and sustain a high-performing workforce. To January 6th?
I'm sorry, ma'am, you ended up freezing at the last moment there. So I didn't catch your question.
Well, we have lost Representative Scanlon due to a poor connection, apparently. So we will, I will turn to myself for the closing question and also suggest to members that if possible, it would be good to connect your computer or whatever device you are using directly to a fiber network rather than Wi-Fi. It's way more reliable in terms of getting online. Mr. Inspector General, in our prior session, just before we recessed for votes, my colleague, Representative Raskin, asked you if it is correct that you've not found any suggestion in your investigation to date of any kind of deliberate attempts by anyone to undermine the response of the Capitol Police on January 6th. And you answered that you've not come across any information that would support that kind of allegation. Representative Raskin also asked if it's correct that there's no reason to think that there was any deliberate effort on the part of the Capitol Police themselves to essentially let the insurrectionists have their way at different points. And you answered that you had found no information that would suggest that is the case either. So to follow up on that point, and this is not to detract from the tremendous courage and bravery exhibited by hundreds of Capitol Police officers on that terrible day, but to follow up on that point, is it correct that the department's Office of Professional Responsibility is conducting reviews of any allegations about the conduct of any individual officer?
That is correct, ma'am.
And those reviews are underway and ongoing?
That's correct. Yes, they are ongoing still.
And when those are complete, will you have the opportunity to review those findings by OPR?
Yes, ma'am, we will. We were planning to review them anyway.
But you've not yet had an opportunity to review any of the findings thus far?
Well, thus far, plus a lot of them are still ongoing, so we will wait for them to complete their work, and then we'll go back and review.
So if in one of those OPR reviews, an officer made specific statements about radio transmissions made to officers outside the Capitol on the morning of January 6th, you wouldn't have that information yet?
At this time, no, ma'am, we don't. Although communications was on our list to review as part of our flash report. So we were separately, without that information, we were planning on reviewing communications anyhow.
So if an officer said in one of the reviews on the morning of January 6th, and this is a quote, a radio broadcast was sent to all outside units, attention, all units on the field were not looking for any pro-Trump in the crowd. We're only looking for any anti-pro-Trump who wants to start a fight. You wouldn't have that information yet.
At this time, no, ma'am, we would not.
But all the radio and control transmissions are recorded, so you could look at that, correct?
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
And you plan on doing that?
Yes, ma'am. That was part of our original plan.
Okay. On a different topic, in a previous round of questions, one of my colleagues introduced a 2017 GAO report about the Capitol Police Board for the record. And as you've previously noted, you don't have jurisdiction over the board. However, I do want to clarify a few aspects regarding the board that is in the GAO report. First, is it correct that as the GAO reports, the Senate has a role in appointing and confirming 2 of the 3 board members, while the House only has a role in appointing 1, and that this was raised as a concern with accountability to the House?
Yes, ma'am, that's true. That's correct. Yeah, AOC, the architect of the Capitol, and obviously the Senate Sergeant at Arms.
So this was identified in the GAO as an issue having to do with accountability.
Yes, ma'am.
And the current architect of the Capitol, Brent Blanton, was nominated by former President Trump. He was confirmed by the Senate in September of 2019. And you would not necessarily have internal emails between the AOC and senior leadership or staff, would you?
No, ma'am, not whatsoever, although the architect has their own inspector general.
Okay. So if there's an email exchange between the AOC staff in the morning before the attack discussing, quote, chatter about storming the Capitol, or, quote, go to Washington January 6th and help storm the Capitol, or to, quote, storm the government buildings, kill cops, kill security guards, kill federal employees and agents, you would not necessarily have that email, would you?
No, ma'am, I would not.
Okay, so that's something we would get from the architect. Now, as the GAO report also notes, the chief has a human capital responsibility that are separate from the board. And according to the GAO report, one of those is the chief can establish regulations to provide for training. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
So the concern raised by multiple oversight committees was that they lacked insight into the board's decision-making areas where the committees have responsibilities, such as campus police matters or campus-wide security, is essentially correct. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I do think that we need to dig into this a little bit more. I'm aware very much that you are preparing additional flash reports, and also that other committees have conducted oversight and are receiving data. So we want to be very streamlined and make sure that we are utilizing our time in a way that's effective and not just covering ground that other committees have already done effectively. So we will be in a position and a posture working with our friends in the minority to make sure that we have compiled the information made available to other committees along with our own efforts at oversight. With that, we have concluded the members' questions at this time, and without objection, then the House Committee on Administration would be adjourned. I thank you all for your participation.